Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
How are you, Jens?
I'm great. I think it's the 10th or 11th time that I'm attending this conference, or these days in Madrid, and I'm very much looking forward. I'm in a very positive mood.
Yeah, it is without a doubt one of the best rooms in the book industry is the one that we find ourselves in today. We've been given this interesting task of kicking off the day and interviewing each other, which I think has the advantage of meaning they didn't have to find a moderator, but also means that we've been left entirely to our own devices about what we're going to talk about today. And we have a few topics queued up.
Yeah, and I think there was not a problem to find enough topics because
No.
I think there's quite a lot going on in the world and in the publishing industry, right?
Yeah, exactly so. And so what we're going to take you through is we're kind of going to go from highest level to things that are kind of more tactical and focused for publishers and retailers and distributors, and then maybe come back out to be a little more general at the end.
Yeah. But I think it's all about setting the tone a little bit,
Yes.
because it's all about conversations that we are going to have on stage, that you are going to have in the breaks.
Yeah.
So we try to kick it off in a way. So and then the very great and profound presentations will come after us.
That's right. Exactly. And we should probably introduce ourselves for those who don't know us. I'm Michael Tamblyn. I'm CEO of Kobo, the ebook and e-reading company.
I'm Jens Klingelhöfer. I'm CEO and founder of Bookwire, a global digital distribution company.
Okay. Should we get started?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. We thought we would start by just putting a little bit of almost a global politics and trade context over top of all of this. We talk about disruptions, about things that are happening to our industry. We usually just get to talk about the industry, but right now we find ourselves in a state where we have not just disruption within the industry, but disruption between countries and trade relationships and geopolitics in general. And so where shall we start this off?
Well, I think there's no conversation about our business today without talking about what's going on in the world. It's sometimes even a bit exhausting. And we just started in the bus, coming here, and it didn't take us a minute coming from publishing to geopolitics. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're all confronted with is a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
So that's why we talk about it so much, because we're all asking ourselves, what is this going to mean for me personally? What is it going to mean for my business? Are there going to be tariffs on print books globally in the future? Will my people in the company be happy? Or will they, have a lot more mental problems because they also have to cope with the same questions as we do as company leaders? So I think we also see kind of different ways of dealing with this uncertainty. So you can see the European way, mm-hmm. that is about we need to regulate this and this and this and that and that. Maybe that's a more bureaucratic approach. And then there's the American way, totally different. So how does it feel from the Canadian perspective nowadays, actually?
It's interesting because we do in some ways sort of sit between those two approaches, both physically and politically. I mean, Canada's in the middle of a big change right now because we're looking at our relationship with the U.S., who's our biggest trading partner. They're our biggest trading partner. We move a lot of goods, culture back and forth, mm-hmm. and there's a huge shift in our thinking that's happening, and it's not one that we're very comfortable with or we're very prepared for. And it's the idea that the U.S. is no longer a predictable country. And that's, and I would say we don't even really know how to think about that right now. And so what we often do is retreat to this idea that, okay, we have one person who's the president, in 3 or 4 years we'll have a different person that's the president and things will go back to normal. But I think what we're realizing is that now the U.S. has become a country where 50% of the time it's going to behave in a way where it's unpredictable in economics, it's unpredictable on free speech and freedom of the press. It's going to become more difficult for people to come and go from the country. And that's the first time we've had to deal with that in a post-World War II world.
Yeah, but let me ask you something. So we talked about like how do we cope with that?
Yeah.
So what are you going to do as in your company? Are you just saying like heads down? We're going to do our business because obviously today in real numbers it's probably not so much affecting your business, right? Or
we're fortunate because we diversified early on. You know, Kobo's business is about a third in Asia and a third in Europe and then a third in Americas, North and South. So the US was never our dominant focus, which is probably one of the things that's saving us right now from much bigger disruption. Mm-hmm. And so we're then, we're able to lean into those relationships that we have in Europe and Asia and spread out the impact. But for publishers in Canada who've traditionally looked south, and even for the divisions of major publishing houses who are located in Canada but owned in the US, it's a very different picture than it was before. And they're having to figure out, how do I reduce that dependence on one market and spread out into other markets in a much more deliberate way? And that is a whole new set of muscles that they're having to develop that they did not have before. Mm-hmm. And so from someone who has a global perspective rooted in Europe, but looking all over the world, what is your view of this? Like, how are you seeing this kind of change that's happening?
So I have to say it's also kind of disturbing. At the same time, I try to be positive all the time, because I think it's our responsibility. Yeah. We are in publishing. We can make a contribution to this. Yeah. So I think we are not, here with empty hands and we cannot do nothing. There is a job to do. There's a job to be done. We have to bring out voices, out there. So freedom of speech for me is a big topic. We're dealing with this also in the German Book Association a lot. So we have a week of freedom of speech. I think this is one of the aspects. Focus on that, where you can contribute something. I cannot travel to the Oval Office and help, the administrations talk with each other. So that's not my job. I'm not a politician. What I can do is I think I can keep being positive, lead by example in my own company, say like, hey guys, we have to figure out our own way. We have to figure out our company future. It's in our hands. And we also have a kind of a bigger mission, which is we have to make sure that the contents that are being produced in this industry are out there in every channel. And they have to be heard. And to be a bit self-critical, we also have discussions within the company. We've had that before as well, because we've been working for publishers where like some of my employees came and said like, do you really want to publish these books? I say, I'm not the publisher, I'm a distributor. So is that illegal or not? That's a very thin line maybe at some point, but we bring the voices out. If we start doing, censorship, or whatever, however you want to call it, that's not the way to go. So control the controllables, I would say. Do your job. However, I think the framework, the political framework, has become increasingly complex, also from the European perspective. And I think a couple of things have been over-engineered. And it's easy to say, hey, the US is just deregulating everything. Well, they have a very simplified worldview. I mean, we know debates, right? So there's always a little bit of truth in someone's, usually I would say, in someone's position. So let's get to the core of it. And I think one core is also that maybe from the European side we have exaggerated a little bit. Take the deforestation guideline, for example. I think this has been the most disturbing regulation ever for the English language market publishing industry, because like everyone is like, okay, can I ever sell my books that are printed somewhere in the EU anymore? I've been confronted with those questions. So I think these uncertainties are not good for our industry. Okay. So I think in Europe also we have to find a way of, a way in the middle, right? So to kind of go full circle, I think we have to focus on what we have to do as an industry, which is publishing great books, and we as companies helping publishers to do the job have to support them with that. And that's not going to change. So maybe we can align on that not everything has changed.
Right. Yeah. And you find yourself very much in the business of getting books in as many different places as possible, not just within Europe, but all over the world.
Or globally. And so far, we are not so much affected, because you asked for that. The digital space is not affected right now. However, we don't know. We don't know what kind of crazy ideas will come up. So far, I think we are good, and we can keep doing our jobs.
Okay.
But can we stick with this freedom of speech thing just for a minute?
Sure. Yes.
Is that something that you discuss in your company? Because it's beyond business. That's something bigger. Before we come to the more maybe tangible things, but how do you deal with that topic?
We do. I mean, we think about it a lot, both as a retailer who, kind of like you, is bringing books to other markets. So you're always very conscious of what's the legal framework that I'm bringing books into, what's kind of the realm of freedom of the press that we're working within. It's just that we never had to worry about that in the U.S. before. So as we're moving books in and out from English language markets into other markets, from more free press markets into more restrictive markets, that's always been something that we've had to keep in mind. And now, for the first time, it feels like we may have to start doing that in the U.S. And there's a whole set of skills, I think, that American publishers are starting to have to figure out too, about working in an environment where freedom of the press can't necessarily be taken for granted. And that's something that, if you live in many other countries, you've had to do for many years. But for the first time, you're having to do that as an American publisher. And that's new. That's another new set of skills that sort of have to be developed. And there's no one living in U.S. publishing who's kind of been in that environment before. So they're having to figure that out too. But fundamentally, I believe that Americans are pretty rebellious. I don't think they'll be held back from restrictions on speech for very long. They don't like to be told what to do, which I think will help in this environment.
Yeah, maybe we get a little bit more balance into the conversation, because there was a pivotal moment, and then we stopped with politics.
No,
when the vice president told us at the security conference in Munich that we should take care of freedom of speech. That was the first time I thought that's an interesting moment. Yeah. So I thought I was fighting for that all my life, and now somebody's coming and not allowing people to say certain things in the US and then coming here. So that's weird. But that's probably where you can see that the world is really changing and alliances are changing.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
And every conference right now needs to have two parts. It needs to have one part that is about politics, and it needs to have one part that's about AI. And so I feel like we should jump into this, because as much as the political world has been realigning, we're seeing very much this this addition of both opportunities on one hand and threats on the other that are swirling around AI right now. And so I think, can we clarify what some of those risks are, you think?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think the disruption in the publishing industry has always been quite slow, to be honest, if you look at other industries, right? So I've been in music a decade before founding Bookwire, so this industry was entirely disrupted by the digitalization.
Right.
The question is now, are we going to be entirely disrupted by AI? That's a very interesting question. Is there a lot of risk? So when the AI discussion started 2-3 years ago, when it really took off, I thought we'll be flooded with content that is AI generated. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of content out there. However, I've not seen that big wave yet in our business. I don't know how it happened in Kobo, but
we see it. I mean,
because you have the self-publishing
that's right.
Entry door. Yeah.
And I think, as anyone who's been attending this conference for a while knows, the self-publishing world ends up being the laboratory where things get worked out in books first, and we certainly see that within AI. So we're getting flooded with books that are kind of assemblies of stuff that's come off the web, with summaries, with weird pseudo-piracy of let's take a book and change all the names and change all the locations and then try to publish it as a different book. Like all of that stuff is going on right now.
So that meant your import team and they have had big challenges already.
And and one of the places that we're looking at having to bring AI into the retail world is to detect the AI content that's coming at us, because some of it is so difficult to find and to figure out. But that's just, I feel like, the very first easiest wave of this that's happening, and there's a lot more to come.
But that actually brings us to the risks again.
Yeah.
So I think one risk I see is copyright. I mean, I've been in 2 industries now, so we've had a big copyright discussion in the music industry in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, because YouTube came up and all the platforms came up, and all of a sudden MP3 music was free. So it was a long discussion whether, IP belongs to everyone, or whether it makes sense to have ownership of IP and then maybe have an industry that monetizes it and makes sure that the creators earn some money. So I think when it comes to, I talked about regulation earlier, so when it comes to copyright, I think we have to be very strict. That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, because when Sam Altman from OpenAI says, well, we're just doing fair use, we're just, our AI is creating something new, so maybe that is protectable. It was actually a fun moment when DeepSeek came up and he said, well, they stole our algorithm. I thought, like, hey, have you ever thought that you stole a couple of million books?
Now you know how it feels.
Now you know how it feels, exactly. So I think the importance of copyright is still super essential. So I think also we as an industry, we cannot just say, okay, we have to protect our copyright 100% and everything will be fine. No, we have to talk to our politicians and we have to find the right path for how can we regulate it. For example, how can the training data be licensed in a way that if big AI platforms make a lot of money with content that was trained and to create some value with their offering. So there has to be some regulation and some rule how some of the monetization comes back to the creators and to the people who actually created the human content. So I think it's a big risk. The US says it's fair use. The EU says we have an AI Act and we need a strong regulation, so you can again see the different approaches to it. The US wants domination with AI, which is somehow understandable because you don't want to be left behind with an inferior industry sector. However, I think we've learned a lot in Europe that it needs a lot of culture to have a healthy, society and a good coexistence of industries and people. And so I think we need a smart way in the middle there. And it's not on me to say this is exactly how it's going to be. I just know we have to keep talking to the politicians and lobby and make clear that we have a stake in this.
Right.
Cannot happen without us.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's interesting because I think as a species and as an industry, we're much better at identifying risk than we are at identifying opportunity. Like we have evolutionary wiring around being able to spot risk and try to predict what it's going to do to us, because that's what's kept us alive. And so I think we have a lot of very well-honed reflexes about seeing AI coming at us and seeing that as a risk. I'm not worried about AI replacing Cervantes. Like that's not where my concern is. I'm worried about being drowned in a sea of AI mediocrity that makes the real Cervantes hard to find. That we just kind of have a pileup of average content on top of the things that actually matter for us culturally or that matter for us in terms of literature. And at the same time, like to kind of turn from risk to hope, I'm also convinced that great artists and great art gravitates towards the original. Right. And AI by its nature seeks to create the average of everything that it knows. And so if creativity is taking everything you know and then taking it in a different direction, I'm not sure if in the end that's what AI is going to be good at. Is it going to be a tool that people within literature can use? I think absolutely. Would Lorca have used spell check? Probably. I think. And would Robert Caro have used an AI assistant to manage all of the notes and the research of writing the Power Broker? Quite possibly. Would that have kept him from writing a masterpiece of nonfiction? I don't think that it would. So I think we will see these things manifest as tools a lot more than we will see them purely as disruptors and risks. But I'm interested in your take on this too.
Well, usually I'm on the opportunity side, right? So I feel a little bit wrong to talk about the risks here, but another risk that arises from the opportunities, I think, here, because I think we are all generally optimists and we want to do great things, we want to innovate. So there's, of course, a risk that you start innovating with AI technology in all kinds of projects and spaces and you don't have a clear plan what you're actually trying to solve. So I think if we as companies, as publishers, as service providers, go into this space, we will not create the language model. So that's.
Do you find in your company you're having to hold back some of that impulse yourself right
I don't
now?
want to hold back anything, which is very important. However, we have to discuss the why. Why are we doing this? What are we doing? And then how are we going to make profits out of it at some point?
Right.
So we cannot just make great things. And we've done also really great things that didn't work as a company. So that's wonderful. So and I can proudly say that we have built a complete NFT marketplace for publishing products. That's still alive, but I would say it hasn't really had a breakthrough yet.
Yes.
So. However, we learned a lot from that, and I think we will benefit from that. But we also made a lot of mistakes there, not calculating, I think, realistically the ROI. We were also in this hype cycle. So I think that's just a thing to consider always when you go into those projects, and you should, I think, encourage and enable your people in the companies to try things out, to work with the tools that are there, and also to create maybe valuable new products within your own company. However, it needs a framework. It needs some kind of a target. You need a problem. You need a problem to solve. Otherwise, well, you don't focus on your customer, on your audience, and then you may end up in a lot of expensive AI experiments that don't really drive you forward.
As someone that has a lot of books kind of flowing through the organization right now, is there a particular place where you're pointing AI to try and address a particular issue or take out a particular piece of cost?
I mean, an obvious case is obviously like the whole field of translation and creation of audiobooks, or like AI-narrated audiobooks, which is a controversial topic, but I think something that certainly will take a huge role in the future of audiobooks. We will come to that in a moment. But actually, the AI thing that I consider the most relevant for us is actually doesn't have to do with books in particular. I think so that platforms will become more agentic, So today you would go into, we are a B2B company, so companies go into a platform, they manage their content, they create price promotions and all kinds of things. So I would love our platform to welcome our clients in the future and say like, hey, what are you going to do today? You want to make a price campaign? So I'm going to give you 5 options what you could do. So have an interaction. We all want as providers of platforms, we want more screen time from our customers. We want them to be in our platform, enjoy the dashboards. And then at some point you look at the statistics and you see like, okay, they're not really spending a lot of time in your dashboard section. Why? Actually, there's a lot of insight there. And I think we could actually humanize the interaction between the user and the platform a lot more. But that's a path. That's not something I have an return on invest for tomorrow. But I think that's looking at how our product works. It's a very important aspect.
And so making it so that it's less your customers having to pull insights out of a system, and more that it's surfacing. It's either surfacing opportunities in their business or surfacing insights from the data.
Yes, exactly. And the interesting thing of it, I think it makes the interaction more human, because it is natural. So if we start talking about the topic, we will immediately talk about things that I haven't thought about, and I would, spin around those new thoughts. So that's going to happen with the agentic approach as well, and I want people to have more opportunities.
So you can be in dialogue with more systems.
So in this regard, it's a tool. It's really a tool. So I try to look at it as a tool in many ways. And another thing is, of course, you run a software company, I run a software company. That's not the case for every publisher here in the room. But when it comes to software development, I mean, the efficiency increase is enormous. Yeah. So our leading developers, we're using Copilot and Cursor and those tools. So they're coding much faster, 30% faster. So that's not a publishing aspect of this topic, but it's I think it's an example where it really creates efficiency right away. Yeah.
Cool.
Do you have a favorite like AI project in your company or something where you say like this is going to change the way we work?
I do. I've one that I can't talk about very much right now because we're about to release it and we can't talk in advance. Yeah. But more generally, I'm interested in anywhere that AI can make us a better bookseller. That's the most interesting place for us because in the end, the books that we have access to are the same as the books that everyone else has access to. Like, we're not competing on the books themselves, we're competing on either the reading experience, like our ability to make the wrapper around the book more interesting, or our ability to find you the next thing that you want to read. And we have so many more interesting opportunities around how we can look at what your next book might be that surface when we're starting to look at that data through the lens of LLMs and AI. And mostly it's about being able to be more surprising or about how to take recommendations in more lateral directions, as opposed to this very, like, we've all been based for so long on this idea of people who bought this also bought this in various, like, in kind of different variations. So to be able to look more at the style inside books, to be able to look at sort of topics and themes and types of characters in a way that was really hard to do before and becomes a lot easier, becomes really interesting for us as booksellers.
To maybe round up, to close this topic, my favorite project in Bookwire right now is working on monetization for content. Oh, that's not you, I know. No. But I think we can monetize also content by licensing it to big tech AI companies. Okay. So that's an experiment. Not everyone is open to it, but I see as an enabler role. So that's, I think, a very interesting aspect for every publisher. How can is AI or AI platform a new sales channel for me? So I think that's a topic we will talk more about in the coming years, because there's a strong demand for original content. You talked about the mediocrity. All the AI systems fight mediocrity. Yeah, there's a little bit of information coming out, but is it really like the sharp information you wanted to have? What do you need for that? Curated original content. So I think this is the value that publishing can create. Really great human content.
And can you provide an example about that? Like, what's a sort of near to midterm opportunity the publisher could have in terms of that kind of licensing?
There's a wide varieties. I think there are those general AIs that just need great content. They just need a big bucket of great content to have great information in there. So let's take OpenAI or Claude or those systems or Anthropic. They need, so we don't talk with these guys at the moment because they're all US based. They think it's all fair use, except for Anthropic maybe. But we talk with niche, big niche companies providing services in a certain area. Let's take HR, for example. So we have a lot of publishers that have HR books. So we talk to a company that has an HR product. They need the best information available for the HR managers in the product. They license our content now. They create information within the system, and then they link to the sources so the HR manager can buy the particular book. This is a very niche use case, but I think it's illustrating, I think, the world of AI systems that need information, and very precise, particular, curated information is going to grow a lot. So there's a business opportunity.
Are publishers open to those discussions right now, or are we at the very beginning of those?
Yes, well, as usual. There's a group that is open. and the group that says that's the devil. But I think generally, I see, I would say, an openness for that. Because when you look at it you produce some content, format agnostic, how can you make sure you monetize it and bring it into the right hands? I think that's what it's all about. So it's easier with nonfiction, of course. When it comes to fiction, it's, of course, a little bit more difficult discussion. But I wanted to point out that this is a real business opportunity. There are projections that this can be $1 billion market. I don't know if that's true. There are always crazy projections out there from people. But I think building this business of licensing into those powerful AI systems that create a lot of monetization at their end and just grab a little bit of that because we contributed something, I think that's a big opportunity.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, changing topics.
Okay.
What about new readers? What do you think about the young adult movement? I actually went to the Leipzig Book Fair in Germany this year, and I was totally amazed. I sneaked in 30 minutes before the doors opened because I wanted to see all the booths, and I took like 50 pictures of new publishers, self-publishers, publishers. Well, it was kind of, you couldn't really identify, is it an author, is it a publisher? I saw a whole new scene of publishers. That filled me with a lot of joy and optimism. I mean, I have to admit, I'm not the biggest fan of dark romance. Maybe it's not, I don't know, maybe you have to explain me. You're a bookseller, so you know better. You can recommend
I'll tell you
me.
all about it after. It's great.
But I really love to see that new scene developing because so many people talk about the dying publishing scene. Small publishers are, certainly publishers are dying, some of them becoming irrelevant. But do you see this trend globally?
It's funny because I'd pull back a bit and look at just demographics in our market more generally, and of course we're having to look at it through the lens of ebooks. So, of course, we've had this this huge surge of interest that's come in through YA, through romantasy, through these kind of successive waves of Court and Thorn and Roses and Fourth Wing. But what's, I think, most interesting for us is that that's showing up in digital in a way that it didn't used to. So we used to have this very interesting split where young readers were almost all print. Mm-hmm. And the growth in digital, the growth in ebooks, was mostly happening like 45 years old and up. And lots of different reasons for that we spent a lot of time thinking about. But for the first time, really in the last couple of years, we're seeing those, call it like 14 to 29-year-olds showing up in ebooks in a way that they didn't used to before. And the same way that people used to be doing their TikTok, here's what I'm reading with their stack of books. Mm-hmm. They're now also showing their e-reader that they've decorated with stickers and all kinds of things on it. And that's become as much a part of the social culture of books as the big stack of print books was. And that's really a totally new thing. So we're seeing that show up in the sales. So we're seeing an increase in overall ebook sales that's coming in from this younger demographic that's put kind of a stack of additional growth on the business. And some of that is, like, we introduced color e-readers and they find that more interesting, and so like all of that's going on. But there's definitely a shift coming, and we have a lot of theories about why that is. We're really seeing the generation that grew up on fan fiction and Wattpad and Archive of Our Own now transitioning into reading other stuff. So they're coming in. We had 2 years of the pandemic where people spent all their time reading on screens. Mm-hmm. And so that facility in reading on screens is now like flipping over into ebooks as well. And so all of that's been really good for the business, but it also is an interesting generational shift that we hadn't seen before. When you're at Leipzig and you're seeing new publishers, young publishers showing up, what does that make you think in terms of like how the industry is renewing itself, like from the publishing side?
Well, I think in pop culture, trends are always coming from the niche. So it's very natural that it's coming from this young, creator scene. Yeah. And I think they just have a different start into their professional publishing life because the world is different. There's, as you said, TikTok, they're self-publishing. They can just be an author, be a publisher right away. So, and this just shows me there is some potential to, find new audiences, find new readers, and that just, I was just having this moment of optimism, seeing that it's not about, things have to stay the same and we have the same categories, so things are really renewing, and there can be global trends that bring people even back to print books. So it's not even a print or digital, debate. It's more a debate about, is there a new audience that we can address as an industry? And this is the same. Maybe flipping to another topic, when I look at audiobooks, so also audiobooks have reached a much younger audience and a much different audience and an audience that has different habits. So I think, I used to say that many years ago, a couple of times, we live in a multi-format and a multi-business model and a multi-everything world. It's become increasingly complex. So I think we have to embrace this variety. So the business has just become, more diversified, I would say.
I want to come back to the idea of demographics just for a second, because I have a theory I want to test on you and on you, that we in publishing are obsessed with the young, in the sense of we are paranoid that the next generation of readers isn't going to be as big or as prolific or as valuable as the last generation of readers was. But we're choosing to ignore a demographic shift that's happening in Europe, that's happening in developed markets, where our readership is getting older. Like we are now the oldest countries in the world. Germany is now the second oldest country in the world after Japan. France, I think, is third or fourth. Italy's fifth. We are getting into places where we have more older readers by far than we have younger readers. Mm-hmm. And yet I don't know if we've changed anything about our publishing strategies, about how we're looking at the world of books that is taking any of that into account. It is one of the things that's driving ebooks. So one of the reasons that people buy an e-reader is you can make the font bigger. And if you've got a big portion of the country that's rapidly coming over the age of 50 or 60, that becomes a really important thing.
And that's really a big difference between ebooks and audiobooks, if you ask me, because the ebooks, I thought this is a young people's game. It has proven not to be, absolutely not. And you can see that very well with your data.
It started as an old person's game and has now become a young person's game. Whereas I think audio has come in more, kind of came in younger from the beginning.
Yes, and that's actually connected, I think, to the audio, to the podcast phenomenon that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years.
So one of the questions I have, and I think you're much closer in some ways to the audiobook business than I am, is I've always wondered about how kind of overlapping or isolated those two kinds of media were. We have podcasts on one side, we have audiobooks on the other. Yeah. But they're very different in style and they're very different in tone. Podcasts are informal and conversational, and you tend to have these kind of parasocial relationships with the host, whereas an audiobook is a book being presented to you. Yeah. Do you think there's overlap and meshing between those?
So a couple of years ago, we made a study in Bookwire, and we asked the people with a professional survey company, we asked, how are you using the media? So is it replacing? Is it cannibalizing each other, especially podcasts and audiobooks? And it was totally not the case. Okay. So it's different use cases, but there's an overlap because people take their device in the hand. And I think we were just missing the platforms that were combining the podcast experience with the audiobook experience, which is actually happening now with the launch of Spotify. I think one of the main reasons they decided to go into the audiobook business was, they wanted more users, of course, they want to grow, but also they had this huge podcast business, which is not monetizing a lot, which is just a big cost because they are buying exclusive shows for hundreds of tens of millions of dollars from famous people. But now they have the opportunity to convert people from podcasts into audiobooks in the same platform. I think that's a combination of this audio overlap and, of course, the user experience within the product, because you have a seamless, no breaks, you just click from podcast, you have recommendations for audiobooks, so now you can listen to audiobooks. So I think that's a very interesting moment for the audiobook industry.
Great.
Yeah.
We're coming up close to the end of our time, so we should probably wrap up with our last questions, or we can cut it over to the audience.
Maybe we should open up to the audience.
Let's open it up to the audience. Let's. We have. I think we have some microphones around. Yeah. You have a global book distributor, and you have a global ebook retailer, and you get to ask anything you want. It's early in the morning, and we're in a sharing mood. So if
not, we keep chatting, huh?
That's right. Or you have to keep listening to us talking to each other. So, questions. What do you want to know?
Hello. Pedro from Portugal. I'm an editor and author.
Yes.
Not a question. Is somehow we all think about this a lot. And what you said, I never thought in a moment we are worrying too much about young people. Before I came in here, I'm going to give a conference about the future of reading, and I asked the school to give me approaches to talk here, not to you, but to old people. And what you said is true. We are worrying too much about young people. But what they say is exactly the same that we say, the old people say, about books, about paper, about digital. The only question I ask is, yesterday, last year, is why are companies not publishing multi-format?
And when you say multi-format, do you mean?
Why don't you see a publisher launching all books, multi-format, paper, digital, audio at the same time?
I think we mostly do.
I think that's happening a lot. So
yes,
we've been
educating with you.
We've been educating and convincing the publishing world, like for 15 years now, to publish in all available formats, because I think you want to find your audience wherever it is, like whatever bus they want to take. Yeah.
Yes,
they should
at
get it.
Bookwire, yes, but if you see a traditional publisher, even the big ones in Portugal, they don't publish in multi-format.
No, it's true.
The audio is coming, but they don't publish.
Yeah. I think like every country has its own timeline where it figures out that there's an audience on the other side of a format. And we see some countries jump into it right away. Some, like Portugal, you sort of have to, some books get converted, you show some sales, that makes more books get converted, that allows you to show more sales. So it's a wheel that sometimes takes a little while to spin. And the same with audiobooks in Europe. Like some publishers have been really aggressive about jumping in and getting audiobooks produced, but it's expensive. And so it takes a while for those sales to turn into a justification inside the publisher that we should do more. And so I think it's a momentum that inevitably grows, and it's certainly getting cheaper in a lot of different ways to make that happen. But you're right, it doesn't happen instantly. And we have to be educating people, the consumers have to be asking for it, and we have to be kind of constantly trying to get consumers to realize that these formats are up there.
Just to wrap up, you know my conclusion last year, not this year, that the companies wanted the formats separated. I'm not talking about your companies. Usually the traditional companies there was an audio company here, want to sell because there is more money selling separately. If you see Audible is charging for the audiobook and for the digital. And there is the Storytel just came with that solution of multiple readers.
Yeah. No, we definitely see publishers who make it a priority to try to keep all of the formats together, and you see publishers who either don't have the resources to do it themselves or see benefit, or agents seeing benefit in splitting up the rights, selling print to one, audio to another. It's, okay. Yeah. Lots of different approaches there. More and more, though, I think publishers are seeing benefit in trying to keep those rights together so that they can coordinate the promotion of a book when it comes out.
I think we've got time for one more question.
One more
right?
question.
Only
Okay,
one.
Only one.
Promise.
So, you both have a huge background in music, not just in business, but as musicians yourselves. How has music helped you to be better CEOs in publishing? Are you better at playing by the ear and improvising?
I have a very good answer for that.
Okay, let's hear your good answer. No.
Actually, you know, I've been a musician. I've been on tours in a bus. So when we hired the first bunch, 20, 30 people for the company over the first years, we said, nobody will enter a foot into this company who I would not go on a tour for a week or two in a tour bus. So
that's a good...
So that has helped me, you know, to kind of explain the team culture I want to have. I want people to, you know, be together in a team. You could also use sports analogy, but music was just better for me. So the tour bus, that's my takeaway from the music industry.
I'll take a much more commercial side to that, which is, as we were starting the ebook business, I became obsessed with the changes that happened in the music industry as music went through digitization. And one of the biggest concerns that was coming out of that was that the idea of any kind of like middle class in the music business had kind of gone away. There were people that made a lot of money and then everybody else who made nothing. And a lot of that came from ad-supported services, it came from the economics of streaming, and it really hollowed out the ability to make a livelihood in music. And I really didn't want that to happen in books. So when we look at the business models that we've created, whether it's on the self-publishing side, or whether it's how we've done subscriptions in ebooks, you know, we don't just have people who make everything and people who make nothing. We have people who make 50,000 euros a year. We have people who make 75,000 euros a year. Like, we actually have a middle class in ebooks, in digital for authors that doesn't exist in any other format. And that's both because of, I think, the work that publishers have done to hold the value of books in digital, and it's our ability to create some of these new distribution platforms that have allowed people to connect directly with an audience, set their own prices, determine their own value for the work that they're putting out there, and be able to make a living. And that's like, that doesn't exist in music, but it does exist in books. And I think that's something we should all be happy about because it speaks to the possibility of a sustainable industry in the future.
Yeah, great.
And that's us. Thank you so much.
It
was great to be able to kick this off.
Thank you.